UFO. Obviously an acronym most people are familiar with. Certainly if you're listening to this show, you're familiar with unidentified flying objects. What you might not be familiar with is a shift that seems to be happening these days. Outside of alternative media, the mainstream media seems to be jumping on board the ship, so to speak. And some people believe that this is the precursor to a bigger event, disclosure, a term that you'd also be familiar with. We're going to be talking about disclosure tonight, and we're going to be talking about more than just disclosure, but bringing people to not only this show, but to events across the country to be discussing arguably the most important subject that will be discussed this century. Disclosure tonight on What in the World, SiriusXM, channel 167.
Welcome back to What in the World with Richard Garner on CanadaTalks SiriusXM 167.
Interesting times as we sit here in March, year 2015. I think that's been said probably before. But as again we've discussed many times on this show, there seems to be a shift. There seems to be a transition happening, and many people believe that these are transformational times. But different people, different opinions on what that means. One of the things that I believe personally that we're probably going to see in the next little while, and hopefully in my lifetime, but I would expect actually much sooner than that, is disclosure. One of the things that people see on essentially a daily basis on mainstream media is the admission or the discovery, if you will, of Earth-like planets within the telescopic range of whether it be Hubble or Kepler or whatever it is. And more you're seeing that mathematically it's very difficult, even from a scientific perspective, to refute the fact that we're alone in the universe. Well, that's quite a progressive leap, I would say, from where things might have been 4 or 5 years ago. Not necessarily where people are ready to jump on board and say we have been visited before, but you're certainly seeing less and less people try to make the impossible argument that we would be alone in the universe. But what does this newfound coverage mean from the mainstream, from NASA, from the Vatican? It seems like everybody's at least hinting that there's an expectation, maybe around the corner, maybe 3 or 4 years down the line, not sure. I think speculating about that is sometimes a fool's game. It's hard to predict when. But one thing I would say confidently is that we can say that there is preparations going on for the possibility, and that's not just my opinion. The US government has actually gotten together and had symposiums to sort of talk about how would we handle this hypothetical situation. What does that mean? Not sure, but we're going to ask our guest tonight, Victor Viggiani of, and I'm getting this right, Strange Days Indeed. Is that, no? Sorry, your site?
No, it's not. You want me to refresh it?
Yes, yes, you could.
Zealand Communications is our news site.
Sorry, I've Googled the wrong thing, Victor.
Yeah, that's
my
okay.
apologies.
That's quite all right. The mistake has been made before.
And Dave Whitehead joins us as well. Dave, give us a little background on your show, what you're doing, and of course, Disclosure Tour.
Thanks, Richard. Honored to be on. Yeah, no, I have an alternative radio show on truthfrequencyradio.com Sunday nights at 5 p.m. to 7 Eastern Standard Time. I cover many topics like this and many others that, honestly, when I speak to people that I know, especially from the younger generation, they're very interested in what they're not being told from the mainstream. And it seems the way that this subject of disclosure and the whole subject of are we alone in the universe, is there interaction happening, that's a question that I think a lot of people have asked themselves. There's a lot of people that have had their own experiences, and yet there's not really a real mainstream forum where this kind of information can come out, where people can feel safe, where they can come and gather information from various experts, whistleblowers, eyewitness testimony, etc. So what myself and my partner Chris Rusak have done with Modern Knowledge is we've brought together, this subject. We're doing a tour specifically on this, but many other subjects as well. And we've done a tour last year, obviously driving across the country, visiting 12 major cities, featuring speakers on every topic, including this one. But the upcoming tour that we have starting as of April 4th of this year is focusing specifically on the subject of disclosure. And we're just seeing that more people are really interested in this. We're getting contacted from all over the country. And this is, I think, the time. It is coming out more in the media. We even have Podesta coming out after he was leaving the administration, the Obama administration, and he's doing a tweet saying, you know, as one of his #1 regrets was that he didn't disclose the UFO files. And there's many, many other references in the mainstream. What's it all mean? Why are they coming out with it more? I'm not really sure, but we know that people want to know about this, and we're trying to bring some speakers together on this subject that are going to bring credible information backed by, you know, just scores of evidence and documentation and radar documentation and eyewitness accounts and on and on and on it goes. And we really want to show people that if you're curious about this, this isn't just a subject on the fringe. This isn't just an X-Files episode. This is not just a joke. This is serious. There's serious, credible evidence out there for people to review. And I just think people, deep down, they know that something's going on.
What do you make of the Podesta stuff? Because, like, this guy, again, for people who don't know his history, I mean, this was, I believe, the chief of staff for Bill Clinton, and is expected to play a prominent role in the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2016. And he's obviously decided that this issue, which he's talked about before, he's talked about it on various media outlets, including an NBC documentary about the subject. And yet, again, he's not being like marginalized. I don't see people attacking him. And, you know, some people I read, they're setting us up, that Podesta is a plant, whatever. And yet, when I see Podesta speaking, I see a genuine guy who's citing the fact that government has obviously been holding back information. He's been on the inside of those conversations. Victor, what do you make of it? Do you think this is a positive development, and do you believe he's the real deal?
He's definitely the real deal. There's absolutely no doubt about it. John Podesta has a history, not only in the Clinton administration, but he has a history within witnessing while he was chief of staff in the White House while Bill Clinton was president, and he witnessed what we call the Rockefeller Initiative, and those were a series of over 53 letters exchanged between Henry Diamond, Lawrence S. Rockefeller, and Dr. Jack Gibbons, who was the Office of Science and Technology advisor to the president. Over 53 different letters exchanged with the office of Hillary Clinton, with people like Billy Graham, with people like Carl Sagan. All of these principles were mentioned in all of these letters. And the fact is, John Podesta witnessed that while he was in the White House as chief of staff. And this is a man who has, when he did leave that administration, he came forward to the National Press Club in 2002 and made his earth-shattering statement that it's time for the American government to come forward with questions that remain in the dark about the UFO phenomenon. He knows that they know.
Why do you think he has not then been marginalized, or at least cut off, ostracized from the inner sanctum of Washington? Not only has he not been, he's been advising President Obama and is now again expected to play a major role in Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2016. It would seem that the old sort of modus operandi here would be like, okay, Podesta's crazy, and he's obviously an older whatever the usual sort of machinations of the power structure would be. Well, Podesta's out. Yet he not only has he not been marginalized, he's being invited back in to play a crucial role in getting the next president of the United States elected. What do you make of that?
In essence, we're talking about a man who I feel, and many feel within the UFO disclosure movement, that we're talking about one of the most, if not the most powerful man in the United States right now. Most people don't recognize that fact. This man, he's a lawyer. He's the CEO of a very, very powerful Washington think tank. This man knows what he's talking about. He knows the inner workings of the government, and he knows about the inner workings, as far as I'm concerned, about the cover-up. And he would not come forward with this without any kind of hesitation, unless he knew exactly what was going on. And I know this man well enough. I followed his career very, very closely since the mid-1990s. And this is not a man who just spouts off any kind of thing very quickly. He's very, very thoughtful about what he says. He's very, very informed about what he says, and he's involved in the taking down of government secrecy. That's what this think tank is all about. So the juxtaposition of what he's doing and the way he's been invited back into the inner sanctum, both of the Obama administration, now with Hillary Clinton, is a testament to the fact that this guy knows exactly what he's talking about, and people want him on their side. And he's probably, in my estimation, one of the people who are going to be leading the upper echelons of what disclosure is all about.
So that would seem to create a level of excitement because, again, I would think that if this guy not only has not been pushed to the fringe, but is actually being touted as taking a very crucial role in the election of the next president, he wouldn't be doing that without some guarantees. We know how this works. People ask for certain conditions, certain positions in new cabinets, etc., when they help somebody get elected. Do you think, Dave, first of all, do you buy it? Secondly, do you believe this is a positive development, and or is this something that is being cloaked in a positive thing but is potentially something else?
I gotta say right off the bat that we don't know yet, and we're all looking to see what's going to manifest from this, but I am very suspicious, naturally, of the fact that you have somebody coming out, like you pointed out, complete carte blanche to say what he wants without having any repercussions. He does know what he's saying, but is he being informed in a specific way as to what he's going to be saying? And are they trying to provide a framework where they want this to come out? They know that the pressure's on. They know there is a legitimate phenomena happening that people want to know about. We've had countless military testimony, corporate testimony, all kinds of witnesses from all over the board talking about this. And are they trying to bring it out in a controlled fashion? Do they want to spin this in a certain way? So when we're talking about disclosure, I think it's important as well that we're aware that we're dealing with the devil, so to speak. We're talking about these elements within government that have been corrupted for a long time, that America knows, and we know it here in Canada as well. And when they're ready to start coming forward with this and having no resistance whatsoever, even though for years and years and years there's been many very credible people coming forward about this, those guys were shut up. Why wasn't he? I think they're setting up for the fact that they want this to come out, but I guess my only concern is, and this is my personal opinion, is how is this information going to be presented? Is it going to be the real disclosure of this information with a capital D, or is this some kind of a, it's going to be leaked in a very, I guess, massaged way, a way that will benefit certain interest groups? That's my personal concern.
But this is why it's wildly fascinating, because that presents a couple of, it probably presents 100 questions, but let's say it presents a couple. One, as a lot of people theorize, certainly in this space, that not only has there been alien presence, outside Earth presence on this planet, but it's actually been part of the control grid, part of the power structure. So, as the, let's say, the most powerful person or the most powerful organization in the world, the office of the American president, it would be hard for them to come out and say, okay, we're providing information on X, Y, and Z, UFO activity, without also potentially copping to the fact that there's been some sort of complicity, not in covering up, but to what degree do these unknown entities have influence on not only the government but what's been going on? That's a bigger can of worms, and potentially, to your point, maybe they feel safe enough now and that they could leverage it somehow in a way that would allow the continued status quo. But I wouldn't expect, let's say, somebody would come up to a mic and say, okay, first of all, yeah, there's been off-Earth activity on this planet for a long time, and yes, we've been compliant with that group, and that's actually been part of how society has been controlled. I would expect that you would hear, yes, we were aware of some real serious UFO activity, and yes, there were some crashes, or yes, there was some stuff. So that, yes, the answer is yes, that there's life outside of this planet. But I wouldn't expect, Victor, that they would go into where a lot of other people in this space go to, which is, it isn't just a couple of grays in some spaceships that have crashed here. but that there's an actual relationship, and there has been for a long time.
A relationship among, I'm not quite sure.
Government, like there's a lot of people that believe that whoever is running the show on this planet, whether they think it's Illuminati or however they look at it, they believe that the genesis of that comes from outside of this planet. Not everybody shares that belief, but a lot of people do.
Yeah, no, you're right. The idea behind, I think, what you're getting at is that there is some sort of controlling mechanism here, and there really, I'm of the opinion that there's no one entity that controls any of this information, unless the ETs are in control of everything, which I don't think is in fact the case.
This is What in the World on Canada Talks, SiriusXM 167.
And welcome back. We're talking disclosure tonight on What in the World. And before the break, we referenced the Vatican. And obviously, people are looking for who's at the top of the pyramid and how would something like this be coordinated disclosure. You would expect that it isn't going to necessarily be a rogue nation that just comes out. Some people have argued that could be the case. Some people are saying that China and or Russia has even put pressure on the Western world that if you don't come out, we will, that type of thing. It seems to be a card that's being played as part of a bigger power structure, but one entity that kind of exists not only amongst all of that, but somewhat above it, depending on your perspective on that, is of course the Vatican. I remember, Victor, a long time ago, not a long time ago, but finding out, let's say, 10, 15 years ago, that the majority or a disproportionate amount of observatories were actually owned by the Vatican. And I remember that being told to me kind of matter-of-factly, like it was like, oh no, actually most of the whatever. And I was like, what? Like, first of all, that seemed to defy the sort of societal expectation around, religion versus science, in that, of course, if they believe X, why are they so fixated on seeing what's going on outside of this planet? And in some people's opinions, why are they trying to monopolize the information that's going on, that they would quote-unquote see things first? What is the history of their delving into sort of astrophysics and cosmology through this sort of monopolizing of observatories? I mean, it says to me, Victor, something that they were anticipating or wanted to be first with.
Well, first of all, you're talking about the Jesuits. That's what you're talking about. The Jesuits are an order within the Catholic Church that have had a lot of serious issues with the Catholic Church and the way it's run. And they've been at odds with the Curia since day one, since the days of missionaries back when they sent them from the old world to the new world to convert everyone on the planet to Christianity. The Jesuits are the key factor in this, and they run the observatories, the two key ones that I know, one in Rome and one in Arizona. And the reason that this particular order does that is because they believe, and I know this, I have a very close friend in New York who's a I guess we'd call a titular archbishop of the Eastern Rite Church, who has a very close friend at Georgetown University, at the observatory there, who has inside information that the Jesuits have known about this for decades, if not centuries. It's just a history of the Jesuits. The Jesuits know that we are not alone, and they've always known that. And they're in control of this information. And you'll just have to take my word for it from this Jesuit and from this priest who has informed me about this, that is in fact the case. And if anyone does the research on who the Jesuits are, they'll find that out very, very quickly. Now, you can go back in different ways to look at why the Jesuits are involved in all of this. And all you have to do is take a look at the biblical inscriptions of what these so-called, and I don't like the term UFOs, because they're not UFOs, we know exactly what they are. Let's call them that for now. But what the manifestations of those things are biblically. And they have taken that information, the Jesuits have taken that information and translated it into their own language that they know of, that there are people from the sky in different parts of the universe that come and visit us for over centuries. And that being the case, and this powerful, powerful order has challenged the Curia in many, many different ways. But the biggest challenge that they've succeeded in bringing about is getting a Jesuit pope. Swallow that. That's the most important turn of events in the history of the church. We now have a pope who's a Jesuit. And if you think about that, from Argentina, which by the way, their government has inside information. Argentina is one of the leaders in the South American UFO investigation. So you connect all the dots, like I was saying to you earlier. If you connect all these dots, you come up with a central focus. That disclosure will eventually happen. How it will happen, when it will happen, who knows? But the fact of the matter is this institution has a stranglehold on this information. Okay? It makes the White House look like a Boy Scout organization, basically. So we're involved in seeking the information. And once you seek the information, you automatically gravitate to the magnet of the Catholic Church. Now you can talk about things like the Fatima incident. Anyone who believes that that was Mary and petals of roses falling down from the sky is living in Disneyland. Okay? They're not living, they occupy Disneyland. The Fatima event was an extraterrestrial event, and the Jesuits know that. Okay? And some of the priests in Fatima in Portugal did their best to play down the story of the three children. And there have been a number of events that prove in fact that we are not alone. Number one of which, and if you talk about some of this is really going to blow people's head off, that the virgin birth was not really the virgin birth that the Bible describes. Swallow this, was Mary impregnated. Okay? Now we're out on a limb here. We're out on a limb. And the Bible has stoically manifested that story in its own way. But there is another explanation. And a lot of Jesuits believe that that is the explanation to that.
One of the coolest things about bringing new information and different perspectives into your life, at least for me, in my personal perspective, has been going back to religious scripture with this perspective and reading it from an entirely different place and starting to see things that you would have never seen before and understanding it from that perspective. And I guess the best analogy is, God big G, God little g, right? And where it seems that even the Vedic scriptures in India, or certainly the Old Testament and obviously parts of the New Testament, seem to very much be telling a story about, again, people from the sky, and again, with the potential that there's a creator beyond that. And if we were to sort of take the Vatican's lead, is that, it doesn't matter whether there's life outside of this planet, doesn't disprove God created everything, etc. So it still leaves an opening for God big G. But when you look at sort of what you're hearing these days, Dave, and when you look back at, a document, I know about you, but I mean, obviously there's a time in your life, if you're a critical thinker, where you throw it out. You think it's myth, you think it's fable, you think it's the panacea of weak people, of stupid people, even, if we're going to be honest. And then you kind of come back to this at or at least I did, a later point of my life, with this perspective, and it allows for an entirely different interpretation. How do you see this connection between, whether it be the Church, Vatican, the Bible, disclosure? Is this something you think is woven together, or are these things completely separate?
Well, this might feel controversial for some people, but because we're getting into the subject of religion, and I know there's a lot of people out there that hold certain belief systems, but I would say that through my years, the one thing I've researched the most is comparative religion and the history of Catholicism, Christianity, the Vatican. Let's not forget about the history of the Vatican. Let's not forget about the history of the Jesuit Order. They were expelled from at least 83 countries. They are literally the most powerful intelligence network on the planet, and that comes from Dulles himself, who was one of the founders of the CIA, as you mentioned, Richard. And we have to remember that we're talking about controlling information. And I personally think that when you go back and you study ancient texts in an eclectic way, where you're looking at texts from ancient India, ancient Egypt, ancient Sumeria, ancient Babylon, the formation of the Gnostic Gospels, the codex that were taken out in 1947 in, I believe it was in Alexandria, that we're talking about this history of human beings interrelating with off-world or other dimensional entities. There's been a campaign to suppress that information, not just in modern time, but all throughout human history. And one of the number one culprits in suppressing that information has indeed been the Vatican, and in its earlier states through Rome and all of that. So the whole formation of what we're reading in the Bible is nothing, in my opinion, in the opinion of many scholars that I've interviewed personally, that the Bible itself, as we read it today in English, is nothing but little snippets that have been clipped together and edited, almost like a Reader's Digest format. Translation errors out the wazoo completely. That's proven. That's not really up for debate anymore in the scholarly circles. And why would that happen historically? And why do we see that same policy in place today when it comes to revealing information to people? It's give them a little bit, make it digestible for the general mass of people. And when you study this, you'll realize that there's what they call an exoteric layer of information, and then there's an esoteric layer of information. And the esoteric would be subtextual, hidden beneath the surface, so to speak. And so what's happened is that there are initiates in this body of knowledge that are brought into this body of knowledge, and they know the esoteric keys. They know how to put the puzzle pieces together, so to speak. But for the mass of people that just go to church and they hear somebody just regurgitating all this information and giving them a framework of how to view this, meaning they're structuring their opinions and their belief system, well, now that's talking about the exoteric layer. So how do we bridge that gap? That's historical, and when we're talking about this subject in modern time, we have to look at that not just from a religious perspective, but from a political perspective, from a social perspective, from a philosophical perspective. How do we piece all of this together, and why have there been forces at work that are all on board, generation after generation, of suppressing this story and suppressing the truth about the history of the human race? And I personally am very suspicious of anything the Vatican is going to be saying. I'm very suspicious of the Jesuit Order. That's my personal opinion. I could do a whole show with you on this. But I would just say that we have to be careful. I want disclosure as much as everybody else. Disclosure for me means bringing to the surface that which has been hidden.
And a paradigm shifting perspective that cannot be... Perfect example is Obama's elected, and I would use this as my sort of personal example of this. At that time, I'm on board here with this particular conversation. So there's nothing I buy about the status quo. I believe people are selected, not elected, etc. Now, that's still interestingly debated within, let's say, the alternative circles of whether Obama's a good guy or a bad guy. I find it hard to believe how anybody can imagine that anybody could ascend to that particular pantheon without being inside. And I think we've seen that the people that tried to pull the Trojan horse, get in, and then try to do things differently, they ended up dead. JFK, RFK, etc. So that's a conversation for another day. But what I do remember about this, the speech the night that the election happened, and Obama came in, I believe, in Chicago, and the undeniable, genuine human emotion of especially African Americans bawling their eyes out, man, at this completely seminal time in history. Not something that's arguable, regardless of what's true, regardless of what's behind the scenes. The truth was that there was an African American president, and for X amount of people, that was so utterly and completely significant that it was one of these times that that you will remember for the rest of your life. To your point about disclosure, I expect kind of the same thing. Even though we're going to know that we're not getting the picture, that there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on behind the scenes, I can't imagine the impact of that not being moving. Just at least the acknowledgement that, because it's a paradigm shift. I mean, we've used that's a cliche, paradigm shift. This is the definition of a paradigm shift. But I'm with you. It'll be a mixed emotions for me that day, and I expect to see it. That it'll be something that you felt like, well, thank God we're able to sort of shift the perspective away from this comedy that we're here alone. And what does this mean for us going forward? How does this affect our perspective on coexistence, on interdependence, on all those things? But I know that and Victor knows that there'll be a whole bunch of stuff we won't be privy to on that day, and we're going to discuss what we think some of that is on the other side of the break. It is What in the World, SiriusXM, channel 167. Where things get complex and difficult.
Very complex.
Because you could not discount that something beautiful had happened.
Yeah, regardless.
Regardless of what was, whatever.
Regardless that it was a scam.
And regardless, and in the same way. So this is where things, where black and white doesn't work, right? Where we live in the gray there, because I remember being moved by it, but at the same time, suspicious.
You're like, I'll believe it when it's
only because you were conditioned to be moved by it. We were all real.
So if you haven't already put up your trays and put your seat to the upright position for the next few minutes down the rabbit hole. Buckle up, people, because we're going where this takes us, which is what I like. So I guess what we've tabled at this point is that, and you correct me if I'm wrong, we expect disclosure, and we expect it in, and again, I want to avoid predictions, but is it fair to say, Victor, you expect this within the next 10 years?
Oh yes, for sure. There'll be some type of disclosure. And before the break, you took the opportunity to mention that if it does happen, we may find out some of the stuff that's going on, but we won't discover all of it. So I call it the big D disclosure or the small D disclosure. If we get the big D disclosure, that'll be one thing. As far as I'm concerned, the big D disclosure will be if a craft comes by and hovers over the Super Bowl in 2 years.
Yeah. We're not going to let the middleman actually announce our presence. We're actually cutting out the gatekeeper.
That's right. Here we go, folks. Here's the real truth. The small D disclosure will be if the government acknowledges that we are not alone, that there is an ET presence on the planet. What the conditions of that might be, and what all the information about that might be, we'll know a little bit about it. It's like a program on the computer. Most of us use Word or whatever. We only use 20% of what the program is capable of. If you're able to use the whole 10% or the whole 100%, then you'd have the whole real deal. We'll only find out a small percentage if the governments, and I use that word advisedly, governments, not people that are elected, but people behind the scenes, allow us to find out X, Y, and Z about what disclosure is. That will be a very, very limited view of what that is. And even that in itself will, as Dave alluded to earlier, will necessitate us to rewrite human history, everything in human history.
See, but that's where I'm interested in terms of what will be withheld, because I think they're of course there's going to be caveats, and they want to avoid that at because again, certainly the Vatican wants to avoid that. They want to avoid that this means that everything up to this point has been a lie. What I think, or what I expect small D disclosure will look like is everything that, is history is the same, everything's the same, but yes, we lied, basically starting with Roswell, that's easy, right? Well, there was some craft that started or whatever, and yes, but, and this is where I think I differ from a lot of people in the community as well, I think it's going to be relatively easy for them to get through this without, unscathed, because I think it's a legitimate, at least by most people's perceptions, it's a legitimate claim to say, look, we did not know what this represented. We did not know definitively whether there was a threat. We felt it was important to continue to observe, and we never felt comfortable to be able to come out and tell people that there was this outside planetary entity that was coming to this planet that we didn't know how to define, we didn't know what its power was, and we really felt genuinely that could throw the world into chaos. You know what I mean? Like, I see that, I see them getting away with that pretty easily. I see X amount of people being like, we just went through Edward Snowden revealing to, the world, but specifically to the US, that everybody is spied on by their government. 1984, 85, that happens. It's pitchforks and torches on the White House lawn. You know what I mean? Like, if you had dropped that, then it would have been people that would have been close to East Germany type, Russia, Soviet Union stuff. That can't happen in the U.S. Literally, people would have rioted. We saw what happened. It was kind of like, well, that pisses me off.
See,
but whatever, right?
You're talking about a script that's already written, okay? If the small D disclosure, the government has this thing all written out, it's done already. If you read Richard Dolan's book, AD, After Disclosure, it really does a great way of speculating as to how it's going to be. It'll be timed at a certain time, the television network should be all set up. And you have to understand, when this script is written, who is it written for? It's written for a society who only cares about the size of Kim Kardashian's breasts. Okay, that's all society is concerned about. Okay, and what tweets are going on. This is 80% of the thought processes of the American public. So the script will be written for the American public, and that's the way the media will portray it. So what I would call the inoculation or the drug will be, the script will be right in the script. It won't represent necessarily what disclosure is. They'll have their own way of explaining it to the American public and to the world, and it'll come out that way. Unfortunately, that's the small d disclosure that we're going to have to swallow, that we will all be inoculated with, or the American public, or the people that choose to buy into it. I won't, because I'm vaccinated against that. I know I am.
Yeah.
And many of us involved.
One
in it are.
vaccine I'll take, Dave.
That's right.
I don't want to get your opinion on this, but recently Stephen Hawking has come out as well, and surprisingly to me, anyways, sort of said, we should be fearful. Actually, we shouldn't be sending signals out. That I think he essentially acknowledged there's more than likely, life outside of this planet. But again, he comes at it from the perspective that clearly they'd be more technologically advanced, and I think it's legitimate to say that if you look at our behavior and how we treat what we believe to be lesser species, it's not hard for me to imagine that, a species that would be so advanced to see us as literally, ants or hamsters or whatever it would be in the hierarchy, there wouldn't even be a moral consideration around it. We would literally be, something to observe, but only in relation to how it affects the observer, in terms of what can we learn, how can it affect, just like we're testing drugs on animals, right? We don't sit around for the most part and have a massive collective moral dilemma about that. We're just like, well, we're the more important species, so if we can figure out how to, make better hairspray and it's going to kill some cats, like generally speaking, so it's not hard for me to imagine that, yet for whatever reason, part of me innately doesn't believe that. But I'm curious, is that something you buy into?
Well, I think that you used a good word, which was fear, and this is what we were just talking about with Victor, about what's going to be injected through this small d disclosure, is this idea of we have to be stuck in fear. Fear is the number one way that you control masses of people. Fear is the campaign of the governments of the world. Clearly, that's based on just studying the history of government. And that's clearly the message that comes through from the mainstream media about this issue.
So do they become the new terrorism?
Well, this was sort of predicted by Wernher von Braun, if you take the testimony of people that work closely with him, where he was saying, we got basically three cards they're going to play. They're going to go with the asteroid threat, they're going to go with the terrorist threat, and if the terrorist card doesn't work out, we're going to go with the ET threat. They could very easily manufacture this. A lot of this could be very easily manufactured. They've got a large amount of advanced technology. If you look at Richard Dolan's work about the breakaway civilization, they could have been working with exotic technologies for the last 60, 70 years. And they could be well advanced. And a lot of what we might be seeing in the skies could very well be a lot of these crafts that are being tested and worked on. And then once in a while you get the real deal. But either way, they could very easily inject the fear card. And that is the number one thing. There's no motivation for the governments of the world, being that they are a hierarchical pyramid structure, to say, oh, don't worry about it, we covered it up, we're coming clean now, we're trying to clean up our act, and there's others out there and they've been interacting with us. It's going to be, no, we have to keep the control going. So we need to bring this forward through fear. So when Stephen Hawking comes forward one day bashing this whole concept, and then the next day saying, well, it's probably real, but we should be terrified of this, I've got questions about that. I don't know about him personally. I'm just saying, when this is how the media is carrying the message, and look at all the movies and look at all the television shows, we're just saturated in being afraid of this. And there might be legitimate reasons to have concern. Obviously, this is going to change everything about history. But the way you approach these kinds of things is with knowledge. It's not with creating more fear, more questions, keeping people in ignorance, and then just bam, we're going to shock you with this. Thank goodness we have alternative media. We have events like what Chris and I are trying to do with Modern Knowledge. We have radio shows like Victor. We have radio shows like yours. We have radio shows and people talking about this all over the country. The mainstream is far behind the curve. And so there's already a body of knowledge and research in place, thanks to the people that were brave enough to stand up and come out with their information. We're just trying to hope that, okay, if they come with a mainstream disclosure that might not disclose all the facts and might have some spin to it, that people will be intelligent enough to go and check their facts and go back and study this huge body of knowledge that's existed for a long time in this country and all around the world.
When you talk about body of knowledge, that's a very important point. we've got all this information and documents and what you say about the government, the Vatican, and all of that. But there is a body of knowledge out there that has been sequestered from our understanding, and that is the repository of the people that are called abductees or experiencers who've been directly contacted. And I've worked with these people, okay, over the years. I've worked with Dr. John Mack on trying to understand what's going on. These people have been infused with information. They've been privileged to in some way, in some bizarre way, they've been in contact. They've had their own contact. I can even assume what that's like. I've heard about what it's like, but I can't even imagine what it might be like. And these people have been directly downloaded with this information. And we can't disclose it. They've directly had extraterrestrials communicate with them telepathically and say, this is what the planet is like. The planet is in danger, and you will be part of that change to make the planet into something that it once was.
Hell of a responsibility and an onus for the people, because obviously, as we've seen, it's actually led to the complete opposite for them in their sort of earthly lives. Very, a lot to download, so to speak. We're going to take our last break. We're going to come back, talk a little more about disclosure with a big D, and see how we envision that might be on the other side of the break. It is What in the World, SiriusXM channel 167. Three minutes.
Welcome back to What in the World with Richard Garner on CanadaTalks SiriusXM 167.
As usual, not nearly enough time to talk about this particular subject. But if you want to learn more about disclosure, you want to not just hear people talk about it, you want to talk about it yourself, you want to coexist with some other people, you want to go out and actually listen to experts and take your knowledge base to the next level. Disclosure Canada is the place to do it. Dave, tell people about how they can connect and how can they attend.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, the website with all the information is modernknowledge.ca. This is going to be starting off in Montreal on April 4th. The following weekend, on the 11th, we're going to be in Toronto. And then the weekend after that, we're going to double tag Calgary and Vancouver in the same weekend. It's going to be the 18th and the 19th, back to back. And we've got, like I said, a stellar cast of speakers, as Richard was pointing out. And all the ticket information, the speakers, what they're going to be talking about, is all available on modernknowledge.ca.
I noticed that there's an open letter on the site. Please explain.
Well, Chris and Dave gave me the responsibility of drafting the letter to the Minister of Defense, the newly appointed Minister of Defense, the Honorable Jason Kenney. And what we do with that letter, it's basically an open challenge to give the Minister the benefit of the doubt, to inform him about what we're going to be doing and what we already know. And out of respect for the man, we think that it's probably necessary to tell him what we know before we go forward to visit 4 of Canada's largest cities to talk about disclosure and information.
Think he'll attend?
Probably not, but we're going to be asking for a response and to send a representative. He can't be there.
Cool. Who will attend quickly, Dave?
We've got the Honorable Paul Hellier, we have Richard Dolan, we've got Stanton Friedman, we've got Grant Cameron, we have Victor Viggiani, and of course we have Steve Bassett.
Yeah,
there
Steve
you go.
Bassett
We can't
as
forget
well.
about him.
Modernknowledge.ca. Check it out. You can find out how to buy tickets, how to attend, who's going to be there, everything you need to know. Thanks to my guest tonight. It is What in the World, SiriusXM channel 167.